Okay, so for our lesson today, we're going to be talking about film music, a brief history of film music. Uh, Eventually, we're going to talk more about this. Hopefully, we'll see what time we kind of have. But for now, we're just going to talk about a history. We're going to start with that. And, there's this awesome documentary that maybe we'll watch. So we'll just see where this goes. But I thought it would be a fun lesson for today. Take a break from the in class playing and see where we get before Thanksgiving. So we have film music, a brief history. So prior to the 1900s, we're starting way, way, way back. Obviously, they didn't have movies, right? This is pre lots of technology, right? So before the 1900s, the closest thing that they had to movies were operas, right? So those came about in the year 1600. The first known opera is actually from the year 1600. So operas and plays. Some of the most famous operas, Eurydice, which is actually the earliest surviving opera that was made in the 1600s, or not the 1600s, 1600. L'Orfeo and Don Giovanni, which this is probably the one that most people have heard of before. It was written by Mozart, right? So some of these famous composers, Scarlatti, Monteverdi, and Mozart, you might have heard of, you might not have, but some of them who wrote a lot of classical music actually started with operas, or part of what they did was operas. Maybe they didn't start with it. When operas first began, there were actually no central musical themes. And I'm actually going to scoot myself up into this corner. No central musical themes because it was music to fit the story, right? So it wasn't like we had character themes or anything. It was what is happening right now and what music can I do to be a part of that, right? So if it was a chase scene, they wrote something that would kind of depict a chase scene. If it was a love scene, right, like two people are professing love, they were like, "Ooh, let's write something romantic." But it wasn't really like this is a theme that we're going to talk about a lot. That is until Wagner came along. Wagner is a super go away is a super important but also very very controversial composer in music history. But for our purposes, we're not going to talk about any of that. We're just going to talk about what he did to influence modern day movies. So here we go. Come on. There we go. So Wagner, this is Wagner over here. This dude with the slick hair and the devilish stare. I don't know. So he lived from 1813 to 1883, right? So we're jumping now from 1600, took all the way up until the 1800s to come up with this type of thing, right? And he's very famous for writing the Ring Cycle, which is a collection of 4 separate operas that lasts a total of 18 hours. And yes, people will sit down and listen to the whole thing. I have not done it, but I know people who have. And it actually took him 4 years to write, which, to be honest, is not that long. Some people will, like famous pieces we have nowadays, sometimes people will churn them out, but really good thought out pieces could take, a year to write. And so the fact that he wrote 4 operas and 18 hours worth of music in 4 years, not so bad. And so the main thing that we're going to be talking about with him related to movies from today are these things called leitmotifs, right? This underlined word. So each opera was connected using these leitmotifs, and we'll talk about what those are just now. Right? Leitmotifs are what we call recurring musical themes, right? So they come back multiple times in a piece or a movie, right, nowadays, or an opera, that are associated with people, places, ideas, or situations. And so, right, there were situations or people within these 4 operas that he would bring these themes back, right? These melodies, these main melodies, and he'd just insert them in places so that you could connect them through the 4 operas. So they're basically the precursor to modern day film music. Um, so we have modern day leitmotifs, character themes, ideas, and location themes, although this keeps blocking that off. I couldn't do the actual like full screen present. Wait, will that work? Nope. Sorry. See, my screen goes away. Oh no, what did I do? What did I do? There we go. Okay, getting back to this. So we had modern day leitmotifs, right? So character themes, ideas, location themes. So character themes, you will hopefully recognize this one right away. Darth Vader's theme. Here it comes. Right, so this is like, everybody knows this. And the thing is that anytime Darth Vader is on screen, whether it's in the last movie when he's like basically dying, but he's like, oh, you've saved me, Luke, and all that fun stuff, right? They use this theme, but they change everything around it. So the context is now a more sad theme instead of this like march kind of thing. So, right. So Darth Vader, anytime he's on screen, that comes back. That's his leitmotif. We have the Jaws theme, right? So anytime the shark comes in, it's kind of quiet. Let's see if I can capture this better. There it is. Anytime the shark is on screen, this is what you hear. Right. So that would be the Jaws leitmotif because it would be connected to this character of the shark. Next, we have Voldemort's theme, Harry Potter, because why not? No, I don't want any ads. Right, the bum 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 bum. That's a little bit of a shorter one, but that bum 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 comes back over and over and over, especially in that first movie. Anytime, and even in the second one, when Tom Riddle or Voldemort, right? Tom Riddle is his young one in, I believe it's at the end when they're in the Chamber of Secrets, and he's like, he writes his name in the thing and says, "I am Lord Voldemort." That theme plays in the background, so it comes multiple movies. It's coming back. So that's character themes. Those are pretty obvious. But now we have ideas, right? So it's not just this person. Stop doing that. This person has this sound, but they have specific ideas behind something or to emphasize a point. So if you have seen Batman The Dark Knight, first of all, amazing movie. Second of all, they use this theme. The opening notes of the Joker theme is used, as I wrote here, right, to create unease and displays the Joker's unstable mind, right? He's crazy, right? He's out of his mind. He's very unstable. And so you're going to hear, it's going to be very, it makes you just kind of uncomfortable to listen to. And you'll see what I mean. So these opening notes. And it just keeps getting louder and clashing with each other. And that's enough of that. But right, so that's the opening. And so what we call that, actually, that like two notes clashing together, we call that dissonance. Right, consonance is, yay, it sounds nice. And dissonance is, it doesn't sound so good. And so they use that for the Joker's theme to say, hey, he's kind of crazy. And see if I can get it. And then the last one is from Lord of the Rings. It's the Shire theme. So anytime that they talk about the Shire, which is where they're from, right? This is the theme that plays, whether it's, however it's written, this is the theme that plays. And I'm sure most of you have heard this in some form or another. It's like the most famous piece from Lord of the Rings. Right? So if you've seen Lord of the Rings, you'll know that that comes up a lot. Anytime they talk about the Shire, they think about the Shire, right? That comes up. And so that's all stemming from Wagner in the 1800s coming up with these things they had no idea would be a part of movie music today. Now, obviously, movies didn't come around until the 1900s, right? So we're like from when Wagner was born in like 1813, I think it was, right? So I don't know exactly when he created leitmotifs. I'd have to look up when the Ring Cycle was made, but this is like nearly 100 years later um, that we're using these today. And it wasn't even until later in the 1900s because, as we're about to see, the first form of movies did not have music written into them, right? Written for them. So although Wagner pioneered the leitmotif, it was not used in movies until much later in the 1900s. So the first form of movie was the silent film. And hence the name silent, right? There was no talking. They didn't know how to put audio. They could only capture moving moving pictures, right? So they couldn't actually get the sound in there. And so majority of silent films were actually accompanied by an orchestra or an organ player. And here's the crazy part, right? Organ players would be given a book, not all the time, most of the time, would be given a book of moods, events, or elements of the scenes in the film. And they just improvised, right? They didn't have music for them. They were just like, hey, this is a sad scene. Scene 3 is sad, so play something sad. Or like, hey, there's a chase that happens in scene 17, play something like fast, right? That's it. They just get a book and they'd have to do that. So here's actually a modern day organ silent film improvisation. Actually, I put it on the next slide so we don't have to keep going back and forth. But before we get into that, right? So the music that was great for silent films was not only because it added depth to the film, which it did, right? Movies are so much more interesting because of the music, and that was true even for silent films, but also because the projectors were super loud. And so the music drowned that out. It was basically like, hey, we're going to give you something much more pleasant to listen to while you watch this. So here's a modern day, this was from like 2016, maybe a little bit earlier, of actually a modern day person improvising to a silent film. Whoops. Right, so it's the 1927 silent film Wings, but it's being shown in like 2016. And so they obviously were like, hey, this is about a guy who's flying. So the opening scene is like him daydreaming or whatever the opening scene is. Play something about it. And so he didn't actually have music to it. He's just making this up, or he's improvising. And he's watching too, and changes kind of based on what he sees. Right? And so we won't listen to the whole thing of that. But basically, right, these people were extremely skilled and they had to know all sorts of music stuff to be able to do that. But that was like the first music in movies was orchestras or playing classical music or organists improvising. Nope. There we go. So now we get into the 1930s and we kind of start to ramp up a little faster here. So talking pictures, the name of it, were on the rise. And move myself a little bit, right? And most music put into them was actually classical music from the 1800s. So I'm sure you can, if you know the song Ride of the Valkyries, if you look it up, very famous. And that's used, like, that's one of the most overused things in TV shows today, even. So, but that was stuff that was used back then, right? Pretty soon, though, in the 1930s, composers actually began to create their own original scores just for the movie. So they were writing stuff specifically for these movies, right? Now they're talking pictures, so there's actual sound in it. They don't have to like play over it. So here's, if you've heard of Gone with the Wind, it's a very famous movie, and this is the theme for it. So this is one of the first movies that actually had a theme for it. Not the ads. Right, they had an opening. Right, so that was one of the first things that it was. Now you can tell it's already very different from today, right? Today we have clear melodies and all that fun stuff, and they had it there too, but it was a little more ambiguous and all that fun stuff. So at first, right, the music was mostly just background and reinforcement of the scene, just like we did in silent movies. If it's a chase scene, it's fast stuff, right? But by the end of the decade, they were actually developing, right? Composers were developing their own style, right, to support the plot and the characters. So now we're getting closer to that leitmotif, right? Where we're kind of getting like, this is emphasizing a character is coming on instead of just, hey, let's play some music. The 40s and 50s, not much happened in the 40s. It was kind of just like, hey, we're kind of figuring this out. We're just going to get better at that. But it also did see the rise of one of the most influential and important film composers of all time, Bernard Herrmann. Basically, he was like a pioneer in this area. And, you know, even if you look back and you talk to film composers of today, they will talk about him and what he did for the industry. You know, he's just very well known. Then we get into the 50s, and now we're getting like jazz, right? So it's not just classical music anymore, right? You think of 50s, you think of like, I don't know if any of you know the Fonz, but like Greaser, you know, in that stuff. That's all that era, right? So they broke away from being symphonic, which is like symphony, right? Strings, orchestra, and jazz made its way in, right? So it had only been really used for musicals and animated movies. But not for like mainstream large productions. And so jazz contemporized, right? So it made it more modern sounding film music. And fewer musicians were also needed for jazz. You could have like small combos. And so it was much less expensive. And it gets even less expensive as we get to more modern era. And you'll see that in a couple slides. Right. So in the 60s and 70s, not much happened. Really just, again, refining, right? They learned stuff over decades, even centuries, right, about music. And they're just now honing in and perfecting and putting that in there. And then you get John Williams, who comes along. And I'm sure you all know who John Williams is, right? And he started his career in the 70s. And so he made a bunch of different themes that are still popular today. Star Wars, obviously, we just listened to stuff from Star Wars, right? The first Star Wars film, A New Hope, was released in 1977. And that's like epitome of leitmotifs and all that fun stuff, right? We just talked about it. And he was using, that was from The Empire Strikes Back, but he used those themes in A New Hope. That was just the one that I found, right? And so he started in 1977. He's using leitmotifs and he's just revolutionizing how we play movie music today. Totally different. And so then we get to the 80s and 90s, and this is where it gets even cheaper to put movie music together. So if you know what a synthesizer is, right, you can kind of play one thing and you can make it sound like a bunch of different things. So the widespread use of the synthesizer in this time, right, we're thinking 80s, and if you know any 80s music, there was a lot of synthesizer being used, like all the time. And that's in like popular rock music, classic rock, you know, pop, all those things for the time. But it also made it possible to score an entire film with only one person because they could just replicate the sounds of other instruments, right? They could set two different instruments at halves, or they could just record over and over and over, playing different parts with a different sound. And so you only needed to pay one guy or girl, right? Only one person to score an entire movie. This also caused popular songs, specifically contemporary rock, become basis for entire scores. So if you've ever seen The Labyrinth, if you know David Bowie, he was the star and he wrote the music for The Labyrinth, or a lot of the music, right? That's all based on like David Bowie's style, right? And I'm pretty sure it's from the 80s, maybe the 90s. And so his whole like style and music became the basis for the entire score for the movie. And so you look at the movie and then you look at the music and it's very different. And it's very pop and all that stuff from that time, right? So, you know, you can really see it changing over the years. Then we get 2000 to present. So with technology constantly evolving, right? You know, when I grew up, you know, we didn't have iPhones, and that's not to make me sound like, oh, all that stuff, right? But that's just like, even in my lifetime, I'm not old, right? I'm in my 20s, right? When I was born, we didn't have all this stuff. And so over 20 years, it's constantly evolving, right? And that includes for movie music. It changes so fast, right? We went from silent films 100 years ago to 3D technology, full 2.5 hour, fully scored craziness, right? Um, so, right. So, with this constantly evolving and having general knowledge gained from literal centuries of composers before them, right? We started in the 1600s, and it started before that. I mean, music goes all the way back to forever. Um, right? Film composers now have the ability to create the literal perfect score. Again, look at John Williams in Star Wars, right? One of the greatest film scores of all time. Right? So having that knowledge to perfectly accent characters, locations, scenes, ideas, right? It allowed composers to turn movies not only into uh, forgettable, sorry, not forgettable, into unforgettable experiences, but also art, right? When you think of art, you might think visual, but music is a form of art, and so now they're turning it not only right. Movies are one of the few things other than TV shows that take visual art, right? All the technology and CGI and script writing plays, and then puts in music as well. So film music is extremely important, and I think that's the last slide. Yeah, right. So it's a very, very important part of history. And since you're in music, I think it's important that we explore all of them, not just classical music and all that fun stuff, but movie music is extremely influential, and I love movie music. So, right, I'm the guy that listens to scores and soundtracks like more than anything else. Um, so to go along with this, I hope you enjoy this little deviation from our regular programming. But you'll have 10 questions to answer about it. Watch this video. You can just scroll through. All the answers are in my slides here. So you can find them. And I tried to word them in a way that like you can pretty easily find them because it's right before Thanksgiving. You don't need anything super crazy. And this long video was enough. So I know I rambled a little bit, but please get this turned in as soon as possible. Remember, Wednesday is the end of the marking period, which means if this is not in by Wednesday, or by the end of Wednesday, it's a 0, right? So just get your stuff in, right? Get this done. This is a pretty easy assignment. I tried to make it not too stressful. So hopefully that works for y'all. Have a great Thanksgiving, and I will see you all when we come back on Monday. All right, bye.